This is Bill from O&M Partners. It's my pleasure to introduce Barksdale Capital's Town Hall. The company trades under the symbols BRO on the Toronto Venture and BRKCF on the over-the-counter market. Presenting today is Rick Trotman, President and Chief Executive Officer, a professional geologist with a master's degree in economic geology. Rick completed his thesis with Barrick, exploring for gold on the Carlin Trend. He also worked at Meridian Mining, exploring for gold in Mexico, and then moved to the sell side as a gold analyst at HSBC in New York before taking a position with Resource Capital to set up a new exploration fund. Rick reviewed hundreds of opportunities over the years, but none of them checked all the boxes, like the Sunnyside copper and zinc property in Arizona. Rick started Barksdale Capital Corp. Not to start a mining company, but to have maximum exposure to the Sunnyside Project. And with that, I want to thank you all for joining, and I'll turn it over to Rick.
Thanks, Bill. I appreciate the warm introduction there. And I know everyone's time is valuable, so we'll just jump right on in. I'm Rick Trotman, as Bill mentioned. I'm the CEO of Barksdale Capital Corp. We are a high-grade base metal exploration company with a project in southern Arizona. You can see a picture of that right here on the cover of the slide deck, aimed right at the Sunnyside property, which is our core holding. Over the course of this discussion, I'll be talking about some forward-looking items. Please use your discretion. So Barksdale Capital, what are we? What do we do? We are an exploration company focused on the Sunnyside asset, which is effectively a tier 1 discovery that straddles the property boundary between our ground and a major multi-billion-dollar diversified mining company next door. We have effectively what most juniors dream of having at the end of their day, which is a world-class asset. We're starting there. That's what we can give to our shareholders now. And over time, what we hope to do is unlock the value of that asset by showing exactly how much we have and what the quality of it is. This is a high-grade asset, so we're talking about plus 10% zinc equivalent type grades. If you like copper, we're talking about plus 3-4% type copper equivalent grades. We have a strong backing with key shareholders, Osisko Gold Royalties, which holds a 15% interest in the company. And as many of you probably would have seen over the past couple of weeks, we just brought in Teck Resources as a new key shareholder with an 8% holding. And then lastly, we have a very strong management team and board focused on delivering value to our shareholders. We're not in this to make a large discovery that allows us to beat our chests. We're in this to make money, not only for shareholders, but for ourselves. So we have a vested interest in this. We understand the time value of money, and we want to make sure that we get on with it. So as an introduction to the company and its capital structure, this is going to be a bit outdated. We're waiting for the Osisko piece of this latest financing to close before we update this deck. But effectively, what we have is a tight capital structure. After the $1.5 million Teck investment, which was completed at 46 cents, and the Osisko maintaining their pro rata interest, we're going to have approximately 45 million shares outstanding at the end of the day, with a cash balance of over $4.5 million, which is more than enough to get us through the permitting process and into drilling the asset. As you can see from our shareholder list down at the bottom, we're quite robust. We have Osisko Gold Royalties in for 15%, as I've mentioned. Teck Resources is now going to be in for 8%. And then beyond those two core holders, we have key figures such as Eric Sprott, the mining billionaire, US Global out of Texas, which has accumulated a very large position all through the market purchases, as well as a number of other institutional investors, such as hedge funds and high net worth individuals. All in all, we are a very tight stock with over 60% of the shares in very stable and friendly hands. As Bill mentioned, I am a geologist by background. I went into the well, I've worn a number of hats over the years, everything from exploration to equity research. My last stint before joining Barksdale was on the investment side. where I sat on the other end of many of these presentations, effectively looking for investment opportunities in the mining space. I decided to put my own metal to the test and joined Barksdale about a year and a half ago with the expectation that this opportunity was just too good to pass up. We recently brought on Darren Blasutti as the chairman of the company. That was probably 6 or 8 weeks ago. Darren is going to be very helpful for us going forward. He was previously the Senior Vice President of Business Development for Barrick Gold for over a decade. He was instrumental in catalyzing and crystallizing $20 to $30 billion worth of M&A over that time span. And quite honestly, once we get into a position to sit down with our neighbors next door, which are a multi-billion-dollar diversified mining company, Darren's experience will really it will give us a leg up in those negotiations. He knows what makes those types of companies tick. He knows what can get them over the line, and having him on our side is going to be very accretive going forward. Aside from Darren and myself, we have a couple of mine finders on the team as well. Carl Schnell, who's based in Lima for us. He worked for Newmont for several decades, has found a lot of gold down in Peru. And then Peter McGaw, who is the founder of Mag Silver, as well as discoverer of many different deposits down in Mexico. He is the world-renowned expert when it comes to carbonate replacement deposits, which is what Sunnyside is. It's the focus of our exploration effort, and he is instrumental in helping us building our team, training our team, and designing our programs to test our targets at the end of the day. So we've got the right folks in place, as we look to unlock value from this asset. So to give everyone a bit of an overview as to where we're at, our projects are in southern Arizona. As you can see here, this is mining country. So we have 2 very large copper mining areas here and here. These are the Mission Mining Complex as well as the Sierrita Mine. And we also have the Hud Bay Rosemont Development Stage project, which just received its federal permit. And they'll be building that here imminently. As well as about an hour to the north of Sunnyside, we have Excelsior Mining, which is another development stage copper in situ leach type operation. So, mining in this area is very prevalent. And Sunnyside sits just here about 10 kilometers north of the Mexican border. So to zoom in a little tighter on the district, this map is a bit outdated. It's going to be updated here just in a couple of days with our July refresh. But nevertheless, we have 2 core holdings within this very energetic district. The large property here to the north called Sunnyside, as well as a smaller property to the south of Sunnyside called Four Metals. All in all, we have about 6,000 acres of property within this district. And the reason that we're here, the reason why all of the majors listed here are present in this district, is the fact that there was a world-class discovery made here a number of years ago called the Taylor deposit. And that deposit sits approximately right here and straddles the property boundary. So it's on both South 32's ground as well as Barksdale's ground. And the core of this discussion will focus in on that area and what we plan to do with that property. So, Sunnyside. Sunnyside has seen a significant amount of exploration over the past several decades, most of it focused on copper exploration. So back in the 60s and 70s, ASARCO controlled this ground, and they were really in there focused on trying to find both shallow and near surface copper mineralization. So they found a number of chalcocite deposits, as well as a deeper porphyry called the Sunnyside Porphyry. They've drilled it extensively, at least in the shallow level. Only a few holes went down to test the porphyry in a proper fashion. But in the effort to explore that porphyry, ASARCO ended up discovering a deep polymetallic sulfide zone, a skarn, And as you can see here, the grades within that skarn were quite extraordinary. To put this into context, the individual intervals here range in value from $100 a ton to $700, $800, $900 per ton. So this is very valuable rock, especially intercepts such as 17 meters of 17.2% combined lead zinc, 1.3% copper, 337 grams per ton silver. These are very impressive intercepts. And if you fast forward 30 years from the discovery in 1981, these were effectively the discovery holes of the Taylor Deep Sulfide deposit, which, once I flip the side, you can see outlined with this yellow footprint. So this is a zoom in of that northeast corner of the Sunnyside property. So Barksdale has all of the ground on the inside of this blue line, and South 32 has all of the ground on the outside of the blue line, with the Taylor deposit being outlined in both yellow as well as green. Green representing the shallow epithermal vein style mineralization that's seen and present in the district. So as you can see, this is a very significant deposit in terms of its size, its footprint. You know, this is 2.5 kilometers long and effectively a better part of a kilometer wide. And as you can see, it goes right up to the property boundary. Now, the holes that I talked about on the last slide, TCH 1, 2, and 2A, you can see here with these small white dots. These are right across the property boundary, and these show that the continuation of this Taylor deposit, which is a world-class deposit, is present on the Sunnyside ground. And the reason that we think that Sunnyside is of great importance is the Sunnyside porphyry here. We think that Sunnyside was the heat engine that not only brought the metals into the system, but really drove the movement of those metals and ultimately created the entire mineralized system that you see here. As you would expect, if Sunnyside is in fact the source intrusive, this gap between the edge of the porphyry and the property boundary, where you see the Taylor deposit abruptly stop, we think is going to ultimately get filled in. And that is the value proposition for Barksdale. So the Taylor deposit is already a world-class asset. The 2018 PEA suggests this is going to be a top 5 asset in terms of zinc equivalent production per year. South 32 just 2 weeks ago put out a resource update further increasing the size of this deposit. So it's growing, it's already of world-class importance, and we know that we have a potentially significant piece of that deposit, which will become materially more expensive as we de-risk this. To give you a bit of a cartoon cross-section here outlining what we think is happening in the system, this area right here is what we call the Sunnyside porphyry. It's a bit too deep to be an open pit mine. The grades, are just not there to allow for, a pit to be pulled. But as we mentioned earlier, this is the heat engine that drove the system. And what happened during the emplacement of this porphyry, think about it as a pot of rice sitting on a stove with the lid on top. As the heat built and the pressure gained, that steam had to escape somewhere. And all those fluids and all of that steam effectively released or left the system through this contact between the green rocks and the blue rocks at depth. And that zone of porosity, that contact, is where the Taylor deposit was ultimately deposited. And so that reaction happens when you have acidic fluids replacing carbonate rocks. And so that's why this pink zone is effectively continuous from the edge of the porphyry, which we have not defined, pretty much all the way to surface, where the oxidized extents of this system manifest in what's called the hard shell deposit. So we believe this entire horizon is mineralized. And the belief is based on the fact that in order to get fluids out here at the end of the system, those had to have been driven out from the center of the system. And so there's no reason to believe that a gap would exist in this deposit between the edge of the porphyry and the property boundary. As long as we have the right host rocks close to the porphyry and they were able to touch fluids, we think that we're able to make a deposit. And sorry, I'll mention that this is the property boundary between Barksdale's ground and South 32's ground. So what does this mean? Why is Sunnyside exciting? Well, Taylor is already one of the world's largest CRD deposits. The recent update from South 32 pins the total resource, so that's measured, indicated, and inferred, at 155 million tons. And that is of effectively 7% combined lead zinc with 2 ounces per ton silver. It's an immense deposit, and we think that Barksdale has the opportunity to host significant mineralization on our side of the fence. As you can see here, there's a lot of open ground, a lot of prospective ground, and as long as those host rocks are present in this area, we have the potential to mineralize those rocks. And given that they're building a mine next door, it's very important to note this, anything that we find is going to be effectively in the shadow of a head frame. So with a shaft going in approximately here, and the processing plant going approximately here, and these are 100, 200, 300 meters away from the property boundary, everything here is accessible through the underground development that South 32 is ultimately going to build in here. And they are advancing this project quite quickly. As you can see from this slide here, they are in construction. These are all pre-development works. They have a $90 million budget this year, effectively getting the stage set for mine construction. So as you can see here, there are twin declines. These are underground access points, kind of production-sized portals that will go down underground to allow them to drill and access the ore body. This is a 100% underground operation, by the way. As you can see, that is going in. There's power to site already, roads to site, significant construction ongoing, and this is merely a chip shot away from Barksdale ground. I could literally stand where this picture is being taken and chuck a rock and hit the operator of this excavator. You know, that's 20 yards away. Here's another shot, also standing on Barksdale ground, of the newly constructed line tailings facility. So this, again, is merely 100 meters away from the property boundary. This is where South 32 is relocating some historic tailings that were emplaced here and another site just off of the page onto a lined new facility that is kind of the top tier in terms of environmental standards when it comes to disposing of tailings nowadays. So this is a dry system. There's not going to be a large cofferdam with liquid tailings. It's all dry stacked in here. But these are significant investments by one of the world's largest mining companies. And it's effectively de-risking Barksdale's ground every day that they put another dollar into the asset. That picture, by the way, was taken approximately right here. And the first picture was taken approximately right here, both looking back to the southeast. And so well, sorry, let me take one step back here. This system is wide open. As you can see here with the property boundary outline and some of the works that we've done on the geology and geochemistry side, illustrated here with this heat map of copper values, this system is alive and well. There is a volcanic cover rock that overlays the prospective host rocks, those carbonates. And we think that all of the veins that we see at surface that have come up through this volcanic cover are effectively leakage from the system below. And the key thing to take away from this slide right here is that the leakage is significant. And if this leakage is indicative of the location of mineralization at depth, which we think some of it is, we're looking at a very large system. So our team has been extensively exploring what we call the permit area, which effectively covers all of the ground in here that you see that's highlighted with geochemical samples, trying to understand the structure that is currently in place, with the thought that if we can chase the structures to depth where our geophysical programs have suggested carbonate is in place, well, those are going to be our key targets, because we know that fluids that have the right metals in them have touched the right host rocks, and those are going to be our key targets. And so over the course of the summer, we have a very exciting series of news flow that we're going to be putting out, where we start talking about the targets that we've generated over the past year, talk about what we would drill when we have the opportunity to drill it, why we want to drill that, and what we think ultimately we can find when we do. To give you another perspective on the deposit, this again is the property boundary with this black line, everything below this black line being Barksdale ground. And looking at South 32 side of the property, the historic Arizona mining resource is outlined in red. That's grown obviously from where South 32 acquired this asset, but it shows you that it's going right up to the deposit or to the boundary of the property. With significant amount of drilling having occurred in this zone right over here to the southwest, which is where the company Arizona Mining's last results that they put out were starting to show very elevated copper numbers. And that's all part of a zoning pattern that we see, starting with high manganese out here at the what used to be called the hard shell asset, zoning through lead and zinc into copper as we get closer and closer to the porphyry. It's a classic zoning pattern, hence giving us additional confirmation that, you know, Sunnyside is likely the causative porphyry, the reason why this whole system exists, which is on our ground. Another thing that we really like about having Sunnyside porphyry on our ground is, you know, the areas closest to the porphyry, which had the highest heat, the highest amount of fluid flow, oftentimes have some of the highest grades, as that heat and that fluid is less discriminatory on what it replaces, you know, in closer to the porphyry, where it has much higher temperatures. So upside at Sunnyside, look, we have a piece of a world-class asset. It's one of the largest CRD systems in the world, and we haven't yet put a drill hole into it, you know, in our current campaign. So this thing is open, it's blue skied. We have the ability to grow it significantly, and anything that we find can ultimately go into the neighbor's mine plan, once they buy us, of course. The latest update on the mineral resource suggests a combined 7% lead zinc resource grade. Everything that we're seeing at Sunnyside to date suggests that we are much higher grade than that. And if we can continue to build tons through our drilling programs on our side, it's going to be very accretive to South 32. They're going to want to incorporate that into their mine plan as soon as possible. So we have one of the largest systems of this type on our property. We just need to figure out how much of it is there and unlock that value for our shareholders. The other asset that we have in this district is called Four Metals. It's to the south of Sunnyside, outlined here. This is entirely surrounded by South 32 ground. This opportunity came to us last spring. We secured it with a very cheap option. The owner of that property didn't have the greatest relationship with Arizona Mining, and hence that property stood there and was available. It's 760 acres. It has a breccia pipe on it that comes to surface that has historic resources on the copper side, something on the order of, depending on what historic resource you want to believe, anywhere between 10 and 50 million tons of approximately 0.5% copper, O2, O3 moly with some silver and gold. So it's a lower priority than Sunnyside, given that you know, it's a bit different style of mineralization than what South 32 is building a mill for next door to Sunnyside. But it is something that's on our ground and something that will be worked up later in the year. So we're effectively spreading out from Sunnyside, heading south, expanding our mapping and sampling efforts, and Four Metals is one of the next things on the list to go and explore. This asset was test mined back in the 1920s and 30s. It's seen a decent amount of drilling, including a significant amount of underground drilling, very short holes, as you can see here. But the mineralization is actually quite robust. So, you know, 60, 90 meters of, you know, 100 or 1% copper, 0.6 moly, these are significant intercepts when it comes to a breccia pipe. And the more interesting part of this whole system is that there is a geophysical geophysical anomaly just off of this breccia pipe, suggesting that this may be an apophysis of something much bigger that is at depth. So we're talking about the potential to have another porphyry copper deposit on one of our properties. So we will get to this in due course. We'll outline plans over the summer and start talking about this in the fall. But this is another asset that is in our land bank, so to speak. So timelines. Q2 is just about over. We have strengthened the board, as we suggested we would do here, with the addition of Darren Blasutti. We have gone through the process of ranking our targets, and over the course of the next month or two, we're going to start releasing these to the public. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to give you a better idea as to what we're going to drill, why, and what we think the outcomes or impacts of those exploration programs could be, especially in the context of the mine that's going to be built next door. In the second half of this year, as I mentioned, we're going to continue our surface exploration programs over the rest of the Sunnyside property, as well as the Four Metals asset. And we're going to continue advancing our permit for our initial drilling campaign. So all of our mineral claims in this district are administered by the U.S. Forest Service. So we have to go through a bit of a permitting process to get the permission to drill the assets. We're currently underway on that at Sunnyside. And so once we have that permit in place, we'll be allowed to drill the asset. In August, we're going to be releasing a permitting roadmap that's going to provide more color as far as what that process looks like, where we're at in that process, and when we expect it to tidy up. We currently believe that we'll be drilling next summer. And so once we put this roadmap out, everyone will have the much more detailed approximation of those dates. And then next summer, once we have that permit, we'll obviously be drilling Sunnyside. And that's going to be a key moment for this company, not only from the standpoint that we're going to be able to really show what's on our property, but I'm not sure that everyone really understands what the true value of that permit will ultimately be. So no one has had one of these permits in this district in a long time. Arizona has pulled their permit applications a number of times. And so once we have this, it will offer up a number of opportunities if South 32 and once South 32 owns us, to do some very interesting things on the permitting side related to their project. And finally, ongoing things that we think that we're going to have some more news flow on coming up here soon. We are always trying to add additional projects within the district. We think that this summer could be very interesting when it comes to the consolidation front. Hopefully we can bring a couple of things to bear here, and everyone should stay tuned. Hopefully we'll be able to crystallize some of our efforts that we've put in over the past couple of months on the consolidation front. We're going to continuously push, on the marketing front, getting out in front of investors. We've hired Terry Ann Wellicke. She's on this call today. I would implore you to reach out to Terry Ann and speak to her. We will most likely be coming to a city nearby and are more than willing to stop by and give you a more in-depth one-on-one discussion of the projects. So I think that concludes the bulk of what I wanted to talk about today, and I will pass it back over to O&M to open it up for some questions.
Great, Rick, thanks very much for presenting. We're going to start with Andy Carruthers. Andy Carruthers, questions?
None at this time, thanks.
Okay, thank you for joining. Chesley Morton. Chesley Morton, could you unmute yourself, and do you have any questions?
Yes, I do. Thank you. I guess it's always a tug of war between wanting to prove up as much as you can and then entertaining offers. And so do you imagine that some part of that would be reached either late this year or sometime next?
Yeah, Jesse, great question. Look, an offer can come any day. It's not something that we're in control of, right?
Yeah.
I can tell you that our existing shareholder base, the large shareholders, they're not in this for a double. And so we are really looking to unlock more value in this asset before we really get into those types of discussions. We think that the permit is going to be a key value driver here for the company. And also, once we start drilling, that's going to be something that I would suggest South 32 might fear ultimately. Can we find something that is truly impressive? And can they lose control of the opportunity of acquiring us if they don't act sooner rather than later? These are pressures that I hope will come to bear. And so while I can't guess as to when they might make an offer for us, I can certainly try to put as much pressure as humanly possible on them so that the offer when it comes is good.
Couldn't ask for more. Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Great. Thank you very much. Chesley, Chris Mulcahy, any questions?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Are we fully confident that the neighbors have the deep pockets to meet your requirements? And perhaps could you kind of wing out a number? It's not a double. Is it a quadruple?
Chris, so look, South 32, they spent $2.1 billion in cash that they had on their balance sheet to acquire the neighbor, Arizona Mining. They have one of the best free cash flow profiles of any mining company that's out there, and are continually building up, their war chest, on a quarterly basis. So I don't expect there to ever be an issue with them making an offer and being able to follow through with that offer monetarily. As far as what the company looks to get out of this for its shareholders, look, fantastically high numbers all come into my brain, but look, our shareholders are not in this for a double, like I mentioned. This could be a 5, 10, 15 bagger type opportunity for, depending on what we accomplish and how much value we can unlock here, even if we end up trading at 10, 15, 20% of the value that the neighbors were acquired, it would provide a significant uplift to every investor that's in this company to date, including myself, when I have one of the highest cost base out of any investor here, given that I came in a couple months after the company was formed and bought all of my shares on market in the 60s, 70s, and 80-cent range.
Is it not true that the geologists of the neighbors would be mightily embarrassed if your theory is true that they missed the main target here? And would that not contribute to their enthusiasm at covering that error by buying you sooner rather than later?
Yes, absolutely. Look, there's often pride comes into these types of situations, right? And we want to, like I mentioned earlier, put them under as much pressure as humanly possible. We want them to fear what we can do ultimately. And that's going to, involve a bit of luck from Mother Nature's side, right? I mean, we ultimately have to put a drill hole into this and show that there's very high grades, very thick intervals. But look, this is the name of the game. This is what mining companies do year in and year out on the exploration front. And we don't think that we're any different, except that we're starting from a much better place.
Can we assume that the permit is more easily obtained since the neighbors have one? Could you speak a little bit, and I'll stop about the? Are you going to take a lot of these feds to lunch? Are you going to? Do you have any special? Do you have any special plans to accelerate the acquisition of these permits?
Yeah, great question, Chris. So the neighbors actually don't have an exploration permit. So they have about 500 acres worth of patented property. So they own both the mineral and the surface rights. And from those properties, they're allowed to drill simply by having state permits, which you can receive in a matter of weeks. They've never received a federal permit to drill on their 25,000 acres worth of federal lands. Now we think that it's going to be difficult for them to actually apply for an exploration permit given that here shortly they're going to need to apply for a development permit. Because at least according to Arizona Mining's preliminary economic study, in year 7 of the operations, they need to expand their rock dumps onto federal ground. They'll need a permit for that. And we don't think that it makes much sense for them to have both a development permit and an exploration permit sitting in the queue at the same time. So from our standpoint, our permit is going to offer them a lot of potential upside if they acquire us, because they'll be able to amend our permit back onto their ground so that they can continue exploring on their federal ground as well. The amendment process will be much shorter than going through the entire permitting process for a new permit. And we've built this permit with a major in mind. So it's long-lived, gives complete flexibility in terms of where we drill and how much we drill. So like I said before, I think that permit is going to be the most valuable thing that we do before we drill. And as far as expediting it, we're bringing on some additional resources as far as consultants are concerned here to help counsel and provide us advice on both the political and permitting front. So we're hoping that that will provide us with some savings in terms of time, but we're still going to be prudent in terms of what we release to the public in our permitting roadmap when it comes to timing. So hopefully we can kind of give you a date and perhaps beat it.
Thank you very much, Rick.
Thanks. Thanks very much, Chris. If anyone who's an attendee has a question, there is a chat function in GoToWebinar, and you can basically text in a question. Moving on from Chris, Herb Stiles, do you have any questions?
Yes, thank you. Sticking with the subject you were just on, the permitting, have you given us a date to expect the permit to be approved?
Next summer. We haven't provided more granularity into that. We're going to, in August, provide a roadmap that will have a lot more color as far as what we think the milestones are along the way, as well as the final expected date.
But did you not say that South 32 had withdrawn their exploration permits several times? And I just was assuming because of the difficulty of getting the permit.
Yeah, we think it's more to do with the rapid expansion of the deposit. So Arizona Mining on several occasions applied for permits, and then it ended up pulling those permit applications. We think it had more to do with their exploration plans, being kind of a limited drill program that they were trying to permit. And then obviously that deposit kept growing and they kept moving the center of mass of that deposit. So, as they continued to advance the drilling, the need for a small exploration permit, where they wanted to drill effectively became less and less important. So they kept moving the permit around, and then ultimately South 32 pulled that permit application when they came in, and we believe that is so that they could have more control ultimately over what they wanted to permit at the end of the day. Because once these things are in process, you don't want to make any changes, because then you to a certain extent go backwards and have to redo all of that work.
Okay. I had some confusion about one of your previous charts, and I hope you can go back to it. It's
Sure.
one where you showed South 32's property right next to yours, adjoining it, showed an elevation scale on the right-hand side for their property, showed an elevation scale for you on the left-hand side. And my confusion was that your elevation was 6,000 meters. If you drew a straight line across, that was 1,100 meters for them, or 1,000 meters.
Are you talking about this cross-section here?
No, it was an actual map, physical map. And it showed the boundary line between you, and you had a scale going up the right-hand side for elevation. That's it. You see this elevation at 1,500 on the right-hand side for South 32? Ooh, that's not it.
Yeah, I'm not seeing that.
You moved off it. You had it just before this.
There might be just a touch of a delay. Is it this one? Or is it the cross section?
Is the cross section?
This one.
It's not the same one. No, that one. Hold it right there.
Okay, great.
You
Yep,
see the
so
elevation comparisons? You're at
Yep,
5,000 meters on the left side, and it looks like it's a straight line across to what's 1,500 meters on the other side.
Yeah, so that's simply a conversion from feet on the left to meters on the right.
Okay.
Trying to cater to both the Canadian audience as well as the US audience.
Okay. Because the photographs of your property taken from their property, it looked like it looks like you were mountains. It looks like there's a mountain that begins on your property, and that you would have to drop your shaft through a mountain in order to get to the same depth that they do. This, yes, that map.
So here there's a ridge of hills effectively right here that effectively separate the two properties. And so they take 10 minutes to hike up approximately. And the ground on this side is maybe 50 to 100 feet lower than the ground on this side of the hill. So not too different. Not too different. But the key thing to remember here is that, ultimately, we don't believe that there are going to be two mines here. There's not going to be a shaft on this side and a shaft on this side. This is all going to be part of one mining complex where they can access both sides once they buy us from their underground infrastructure that will be in place. So we think it's going to be it's not a very wise use of capital to build a mine next door to a mine, so to speak. So ultimately, we just need to put a bow on this and deliver it at a great price to our neighbors.
Okay. And a question about the drilling results on which your estimates of your ore bodies concentration, for example, is based on how old are those drill results, and the heat map that you showed, for example, of the copper. It was a copper heat map, I think it was, showing that there's a significant copper presence on your property to the west of the South 32 property.
Yeah, so these drill holes that are on this page right here are from 1981. So a lot of the drilling into the porphyry, as well as the shallow chalcocite blanket and the various breccia pipes on the property, were from the 1970s. These drill holes were from the early 1980s. And then all of the samples that you saw that were incorporated to create that heat map, those are Barksdale samples. So we collected approximately 2,000 rock chip samples over the past 12 months as part of our technical programs on the property.
Okay. And I guess that leads me to think, and this should be my last question, has to do with what the focus is going to be, what the objective is going to be of your drilling. You know a lot from South 32's exploration of their property, and you're taking a better guess at where the porphyry is on your property. What is it that you hope to demonstrate by your first drilling results in 2020?
So what we hope to demonstrate, Herb, is that we have, the tiger by its tail, so to speak. So we're going to be looking to drill our highest priority target, which again, we'll start releasing some of that information to the public here in the next month or two. But, there's an old mining adage, you want to keep 1 foot in ore, so to speak. And I think that's where we will start. We want to show that this deposit continues across the property boundary from their side to our side, with some significant step outs from the mineralization that we already see. We have some thoughts as to where the highest grades might be along some very concentrated structural corridors, and those are going to be our priority targets. And so I would suggest, and this is something that ultimately the board and the management of Barksdale will need to sit down and come to a decision on. But I suggest that we will most likely have a 2 drill rig program with 1 rig, actively stepping out, keeping 1 foot in ore, so to speak, and another rig, perhaps, taking some bigger swings. But ultimately, that'll be a function of where we're at as a company once we get these permits and what we want to do. So, those are my thoughts. We'll give additional guidance to the market, as we progress here.
So it sounds as though if you're trying to then establish with your step out where the source porphyry is, that's a copper porphyry most likely. And you're likely to produce some results that are mainly in copper, and you probably don't really have a good idea what the zinc content might be.
Yeah, so two different targets there. One would be the copper porphyry itself, which has been partially delineated by, let's call it half a dozen holes. And so we know that copper porphyry, is of modest grade, kind of, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4 type copper grades. Percent, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4% copper grades. And that's not going to be the primary target. The primary target is going to be the CRD mineralization, that polymetallic zinc, lead, silver, copper material that you see on these drill holes here. That's going to be the primary target. And what we hope to do is show that between the edge of that porphyry and the edge of our property boundary, that we have a significant amount of these types of tons, these polymetallic tons. So
okay, that's all the questions.
We won't necessarily target the porphyry in these first rounds of drilling.
Okay. Sorry, I got the wrong impression about that.
No
thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Great. Thank you very much, Herb. John Burke, any questions?
Hello.
Yep, go ahead, John.
Hello, Rick. How are you?
Hey, John.
Good presentation. Very concise. Thank you. The infrastructure that you spoke of, the power line that has been put in, is that owned by South 32 or is that public?
That's public. So that infrastructure was put in perhaps more than 50 years ago when the historic mines were active in this area. So I'll go to this slide. There were several mines actually that were active here. This one here called the Josephine, this one here called the Trench, and then there was a World's Fair up here, and then the Flux mine here. These were all epithermal vein type showings and operations to kind of put them all into one box, slightly different obviously. But that power line came in to the historic operations, and then there was a town over here. So that infrastructure has been in place for a very long time. It'll be upgraded for the mine that will be put in here, but that infrastructure and the right-of-ways have been there for a long time.
Are labor and water an issue at all in this area?
As I mentioned earlier, this is a mining area, so lots of miners in the region. Underground miners, probably a slightly different question, but Nevada is just one state away, so to speak. So we don't expect there to be any issues on the labor side. This is going to be a large mine by output in terms of what it will produce, kind of on the realm of 500 million pounds of lead and zinc per year, a couple million ounces of silver, but it won't be extraordinarily large as far as the amount of tonnage that goes through that mine because of the grades. And so we don't think that labor is going to be an issue. There's water in the area, and South 32 and Arizona Mining, its predecessor, have been working on securing water for this operation for a while. So I'm not exactly sure of where they're sourcing it, but I've had multiple touch points in the local market, and I have some thoughts as to where they're going to source it. So I don't think that that's going to be a hindrance to any operation, especially with the dry stack tailing. They'll be able to recycle a lot of water off of that because they dewater those tailings before they go out onto the dam itself.
Thank you.
Of course.
Great. Thank you very much, John. Martin DeBovis, questions, please. Martin, can you unmute yourself? Bob Hermanos, can you unmute yourself, please? Bob Hermanos, any questions? We have one question from James Fraser, which he chatted in, and that is, can you comment on your option agreement with Regal and when will it trade again? And when it will trade again?
Those are great questions. So our option deal with Regal is a 4-year option. The details of that option are in the back of our corporate presentation. So if you go to our website and you download the presentation, you can get all of these details. But effectively, it's a 4-year option where we can earn into 67.5% of the project by making a combination of cash, exploration investments, and delivering a certain number of shares to Regal. We have already delivered to them 5.1 million shares out of the 15 million total, as well as about $1 million in cash. The key thing on this option to remember is that it does not start until we have that exploration permit in hand. So none of these payments, none of the exploration requirements are due until we have that permit. So it gives us a lot of flexibility and a lot of optionality in terms of how we progress. It's also a 2-stage option, so we can go to 51%. And then elect to either stay there and everyone funds pro rata, or take it to 67.5%, at which point Barksdale will be responsible for 67.5% of the spending commitments, Regal 32.5%, and Barksdale will always maintain operational control over the asset. Other thing to remember is that there's an accelerated dilution clause, as well as ROFRs both ways. So if Barksdale or Regal were to try to sell their interest in the asset, the other party would have an opportunity to buy them. And if either party does not fund their work commitments, they will be diluted at an accelerated rate. So, ultimately, this gives us a lot of comfort that we will be able to cement our ownership here, and gives us, a lot of flexibility in terms of how we operate the asset going forward. And then as far as Regal coming back up into trading, that's a question that you need to aim towards Regal management. We have no idea there.
Okay, great. Thank you for that, Rick. Another question that came in is regarding your shareholders. Are you at all worried about a take under, something like a bid up 30% from here or something like that?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Like I mentioned before, our shareholders are not in this for a double. Between Osisco and Tech, that's approximately 23% of our shares outstanding. Management and board have another significant chunk there. It'll be very hard for someone to come in and acquire this company unless the key players that I just mentioned are on side with that offer.
Gotcha. And the last thing that came in is, how would the copper change the processing? Would there be potentially 2 concentrates? I know it's early days for you, but how would that change the economics, either for you or for South 32?
So there'll most likely be 3 concentrates. So a lead concentrate, which will have a very large amount of silver contained within, a zinc concentrate, and then a copper concentrate. So as I mentioned before, the Taylor deposit itself, it doesn't have a significant amount of copper in terms of its average overall grade, but as you get closer to the Sunnyside property, it looks like those copper grades are picking up. So we imagine that there will be a copper concentrate portion of that recovery, a flotation line included within that mill. So there would be 3 concentrates going out. And then as far as copper is concerned, there's the Bingham smelter just north of Arizona in Utah. And then you can also ship copper concentrates out of the port of Guaymas, which is just a couple hours south by road or rail.
Gotcha. And in terms of depth on your property from South 32 going into your property, what kind of depth do you anticipate, or is it just too early to do that?
It's too early to say that. We do know where, the depths are trending, so I can talk about trends, but ultimately we're going to need to drill it to figure out the exact depths. So what I can say is that this deposit, if you follow my mouse, dips this way to the north. And so areas up here are going to be deeper, areas down here are going to be shallower. And so where our intercepts are located here in terms of depth from, drill hole depths, they start at about 1,000, 1,100 meters and go down from there. South 32 has put out drilling intercepts from up here in this little notch, and the depths are kind of in the range of 1,400 meters. So we expect as you go north for it to get deeper, as you go south for it to get shallower. So we expect kind of anywhere between 600 and 1,000 meter depths down here, and 1,000 to 1,500-1,600 meter depths to the north. Over here, we're currently working on some structural analysis to figure out where some of these fault offsets might have pushed the carbonates around. So we'll have more out on that at a later date. But the key thing to remember is that as far as Arizona Mining's plan was concerned, the shaft was going in approximately right here to 1,100 meters. And so the depth, if this was a greenfields project, could be concerning. Although, 1,000 meters is really, it's nothing new in today's day and age. But the fact that the infrastructure is going to be in place just across the property boundary really changes the whole strategy here, because you are not going to build a whole set of infrastructure on this side to match the infrastructure being built on this side. So once they put that shaft down, you're talking about a sustaining capital exercise on how much it costs to go 100 meters, down and to the left or up and to the right. And quite honestly, grade will win out. So if we have higher grade, more valuable rock on our side, it will win out over shallower, lower grade material as long as the economics are there. So we are quite confident as long as we show that we have high grade resources, it'll all get folded into that mine plan, and it'll make us extremely attractive to South 32's development plan to help speed up IRR, payback, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, great. Martin Bovis, we're just going to try one more time. Martin, can you unmute? Can you speak? And Bob Romanos, can you try to unmute yourself?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I heard this story last year, and other than the chips that you mentioned, what was done during that period?
Yep. So a lot of different things. So the first and foremost is our advancement on the permitting side. So last spring, we effectively deassembled the previous version of the permit and applied for a brand new permit, which was an area permit. And over the past 8 to 9 months, we've been advancing that along through several drafts through the agencies. So that was a key one. Over the past 12 months, we have undertaken a very large exploration program where we have focused on very detailed mapping over this permit area and slightly more broadly than that. We have done NSAMT geophysics over the permit area as well. And we have began folding all of that information into a three-dimensional model. So really kind of beefing up our drilling targets and all of our plans going forward. And then lastly, we've added significantly to our shareholder register. So when we talked last year, we would not have had either Osisko, Gold Royalties, nor Teck in the deal, both of which we think are significant, validating points when it comes to both technical and financial merits of the deposit and our company.
Yeah, and those chips, where did they come from? Were they surface?
Yep, surface. Yep. So We took, I think it was 1,904 chip samples over the area that you see on this slide. We've got great surface exposure here as far as rock outcrops, and that really afforded us the opportunity to really do some laser focused sampling in this area to try to get controls over those mineralized structures.
Right, thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Bob. Rick has a hard stop in a couple minutes, so I want to thank you all for joining us here today. I want to thank you, Rick, for presenting, and any last words before we go.
Look, we continue to make progress, both on the shareholder side, bringing in new investors, on the technical side, and you know, over the past couple of weeks on the share price side. So we hope to build on this momentum, keep feeding the market with new results as we de-risk this project and advance it to drilling next year. We think that this is a great opportunity, and you know, we personally, you know, have a lot at stake here, and we think that all stakeholders, all investors on Barksdale have a great opportunity, you know, to make outsized returns as we continue to push this thing forward. So thank you for your time today, and I look forward to hearing more comments and feedback on a one-on-one basis.
Thanks very much, Rick. Thank you all for joining, and have a good afternoon.
Cheers, everyone.